My name is Nora, and I'm 29 years old. 6 months ago, I was forced to sign divorce papers by my mother-in-law, who thought she could break me completely. She believed I would crumble under her manipulation and disappear quietly from her son's life. But tonight, at the most luxurious party of Chicago's social season, she's about to discover just how wrong she was. As I adjust my red dress one final time before entering the Whitmore estate, I can't help but smile. She thought breaking me would be easy. Tonight she'll learn how wrong she was. Before I share what happened that night, tell me where you're watching from and please hit that like button if you've ever felt underestimated. You'll want to stay until the end to see how this story unfolds. Let me take you back to where it all began 4 years ago in downtown Chicago. I was attending an art exhibition on a crisp October evening when I first met Marcus Whitmore. I had gone there alone seeking inspiration for my graphic design work when this tall, charming man with kind eyes approached me near a contemporary sculpture display. Marcus was 32, a successful architect with an infectious laugh and a passion for creative expression that matched my own. Our conversation flowed effortlessly that night. He was genuinely interested in my perspective on the artwork, not trying to impress me with his knowledge or wealth. When he offered to buy me coffee at the Gallery Cafe, I found myself saying yes without hesitation. We talked for hours about art dreams and life, until the security guard politely informed us the gallery was closing. What drew me to Marcus wasn't his family's money or social status, though I would learn about both soon enough. It was his authenticity, his respect for my independence, and the way he made me laugh until my sides hurt. Over the following months, we explored Chicago together. He would pick me up in his modest Honda Civic, not the luxury cars I later discovered he owned, and we would drive to small coffee shops in neighborhoods far from his usual social circles. Our relationship blossomed naturally. Marcus was proud of my work as a graphic designer and would often bring potential clients my way. He never made me feel like I needed to change or conform to fit into his world. When he proposed 18 months later during a quiet dinner at our favorite little Italian restaurant in Little Italy, it wasn't with fanfare or photographers. It was just us, authentic and real. The wedding 2 years ago was indeed a grand affair held at the Whitmore family estate in Lake Forest. The ceremony took place in their sprawling gardens with over 300 guests in attendance. I remember feeling overwhelmed by the opulence, the designer gowns, and the carefully orchestrated elegance of it all. But Marcus held my hand throughout the entire day, whispering jokes in my ear during the more pompous moments, making me feel grounded and loved. Our early married life was like a fairy tale. We lived in a beautiful penthouse in the Gold Coast, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. Marcus supported my design business completely, even converting one of our spare bedrooms into a professional studio space for me. We traveled to Europe that first summer, spending weeks exploring art museums in Paris and hiking through the Italian countryside. But even during those golden early days, I began to notice Eleanor Whitmore watching me with calculating eyes. Eleanor was 58, impeccably dressed, and commanded respect in Chicago's high society circles. She was the chairman of multiple charitable organizations, and her opinion carried significant weight in social matters. At family gatherings, she would make subtle comments about my background, always delivered with a smile that never reached her eyes. How refreshing to have someone so grounded in the family. She would say the pause before grounded, always loaded with meaning. She had a talent for asking questions that sounded innocent, but were designed to highlight my middle-class origins. "Oh, did your parents attend college? How nice that you're so self-made." Marcus, bless his heart, would always defend me in those early days. He would firmly redirect conversations when his mother became too pointed in her observations. "Mom, Nora's success is something to celebrate, not analyze," he would say, wrapping his arm around my waist protectively. I loved him even more for standing up to his formidable mother. But I could see the wheels turning in Eleanor's mind during family dinners and social events. She would study me like I was a puzzle she needed to solve, or perhaps more accurately, a problem she needed to eliminate. The way she looked at me reminded me of how a chess master studies the board, always thinking several moves ahead. The first real cracks in our happiness began to show 8 months before that fateful night when I would be forced to sign those divorce papers. Eleanor had started making more frequent visits to our penthouse, usually when Marcus was at work. She would arrive unannounced using the spare key Marcus had given her for emergencies. I remember one particular afternoon in early spring when I was working in my studio. The doorbell rang, and I found Eleanor standing in our hallway with a small army of interior designers trailing behind her. Without invitation, they swept into our home like they owned the place. "I thought it was time to update the decor," Eleanor announced, her voice carrying that tone of authority she used when she expected no resistance. "These furnishings are so pedestrian. We need something more befitting the Whitmore name." I watched in growing anger as strangers evaluated our carefully chosen furniture, the pieces Marcus and I had selected together during weekend antique shopping trips. One designer actually picked up a ceramic vase I had made in a pottery class and wrinkled his nose. "This will definitely have to go," he murmured to his assistant. "Excuse me," I said, my voice trembling with controlled fury. "This is my home and I didn't request any decorating services." Eleanor's smile was sharp as a blade. "Oh, darling, I'm just trying to help. You'll understand when you've been part of established society longer. Image matters so much in our circles." That evening, when I told Marcus about the incident, he seemed distracted, checking his phone constantly during dinner. "Mom means well," he said without looking up from his device. "Maybe she has a point about updating some things." I felt like I had been slapped. This was the man who had once praised my artistic sensibilities and supported my independence. Now he was casually dismissing my feelings and agreeing with his mother's implied criticism of my taste. What I didn't know at the time was that Eleanor had been conducting a strategic campaign behind the scenes. Through my later investigation, I discovered that she had been meeting with Marcus regularly at his architectural firm during lunch hours. These weren't casual mother-son visits, but calculated sessions where she slowly poisoned his mind against me. "She's holding you back, Marcus," Eleanor would say during these private conversations. "Look at how the Thorntons reacted when she wore that off-the-rack dress to their gala. You need a wife who understands our world, who can be an asset to your career." I learned about these meetings through a text message I accidentally saw on Marcus's phone while he was in the shower. The message from Eleanor read, "Lunch tomorrow at 1 p.m. We need to discuss the situation at home. This can't continue." When I confronted Marcus about these secret meetings, our first real fight erupted. He accused me of being paranoid and invasive. "She's my mother, Nora. Of course we talk. You're being unreasonable." "Unreasonable? She's interfering in our marriage and you're enabling her. She's trying to help us succeed socially. Not everyone grew up understanding these expectations." The words hit me like ice water. Marcus had never spoken to me that way before, with that condescending tone that echoed his mother's voice perfectly. Eleanor's next tactic was exclusion. She began organizing family events and social gatherings that were mysteriously family-only or had limited space that somehow never included me. Marcus would come home from these events with stories about the interesting people he had met, the business connections he had made, completely oblivious to how deliberate these exclusions were. I tried to integrate myself into Eleanor's social circle by volunteering for her charity work. I offered my graphic design services free of charge for their fundraising materials. But every suggestion I made was politely dismissed, every contribution minimized or ignored. The monthly charity board meetings became exercises in subtle humiliation. Eleanor would seat me at the far end of the table, introduce me as Marcus's little wife, and then proceed to discuss matters as if I weren't present. When I did contribute ideas, she would smile patronizingly and say things like, "How sweet, but I think we need someone with more experience in these matters." Family dinners at the Whitmore estate became weekly torture sessions. Eleanor had perfected the art of the loaded question and the backhanded compliment. "Nora, dear, that's an interesting choice of conversation topic. Did you read that in one of your magazines?" she would say when I tried to discuss current events or cultural matters. Marcus, meanwhile, was becoming increasingly distant. He worked later hours, traveled more frequently for projects, and when he was home, he seemed preoccupied and irritable. Our conversations became stilted and superficial. The man who once eagerly shared every detail of his day with me now responded to my questions with single-word answers. I began to suspect there was more to his emotional distance than just work stress. There were too many business dinners I wasn't invited to, too many weekend conferences that seemed to require his constant attention. When I suggested joining him for a weekend work retreat in Milwaukee, he quickly dismissed the idea. "It's really just boring architectural stuff," he said, not meeting my eyes. "You'd hate it." But I saw the way he carefully packed his best suits, his expensive cologne, and took extra care with his appearance. This wasn't the behavior of someone heading to a boring work conference. 6 months before that life-changing night at the luxury party, Eleanor escalated her campaign to a level I never could have imagined. What had started as subtle manipulation evolved into calculated psychological warfare designed to destroy my marriage and my life completely. The first sign that something had shifted dramatically was when I noticed a black sedan following me during my daily routines. At first I thought it was coincidence, but the same car appeared outside my gym, my grocery store, and even parked across from clients' offices when I went to meetings. When I mentioned this to Marcus, he dismissed my concerns as paranoia. "You're being ridiculous, Nora. Why would anyone follow you?" But I wasn't being paranoid. Eleanor had indeed hired a private investigator to monitor my every move. She was looking for any behavior she could twist into evidence of impropriety or instability. The investigator photographed me having innocent coffee meetings with male clients, documented my grocery shopping habits, and even recorded the times I went to the gym. Eleanor's next move was character assassination within Chicago's social circles. She began a whisper campaign that was both sophisticated and devastating. At charity luncheons and society gatherings, she would express concerns about my mental state and my motivations for marrying Marcus. "I'm worried about Marcus," she would confide to other prominent women, her voice dripping with manufactured concern. "That girl he married seems so focused on material things. Just last week she was asking about our family investments. It makes me wonder about her true intentions." The effects were swift and brutal. Invitations to social events stopped arriving. Clients began canceling design projects without explanation. Women who had been friendly acquaintances suddenly became cold and distant when I encountered them at public events. The devastating blow came during the annual Children's Hospital Charity Gala, one of the most prestigious events on Chicago's social calendar. I had been looking forward to this event for months, had purchased a beautiful gown, and was excited to support such an important cause alongside Marcus. The evening started well enough. Marcus looked handsome in his tuxedo, and we made an attractive couple as we walked into the Palmer House ballroom. But as the night progressed, I noticed people avoiding eye contact with me, conversations stopping when I approached groups, and an overall atmosphere of whispered gossips and meaningful glances. The public humiliation reached its peak during the auction portion of the evening. Eleanor took the stage to introduce a particularly expensive auction item, and as she spoke, her eyes found mine across the crowded room. "Before we continue," Eleanor announced to the crowd of 500 guests, "I want to address some concerns that have been brought to my attention about the integrity of our charitable community." My blood ran cold as I realized what was happening. It has come to my attention that some individuals may be using their association with our charitable work for personal gain, exploiting our generosity and trust for material benefit. While she never mentioned my name directly, every person in that room knew exactly who she was referring to. The pointed looks, the murmurs of agreement from other society matrons, and Marcus's mortified expression told me everything I needed to know. I excused myself and spent the rest of the evening in the ladies' lounge trying to compose myself while other women whispered about me in the adjacent stalls. But Eleanor's most diabolical move was still to come. She had been systematically sabotaging my professional life by contacting my clients directly. Using her social connections and implied threats about their own standing in Chicago society, she convinced several major clients to terminate their contracts with my design firm. My business, which had been thriving for 3 years, suddenly lost 60% of its revenue within 2 months. Clients cited changing needs or budget constraints, but the pattern was too obvious to be coincidental. Eleanor was choking the financial life out of my independence, making me completely dependent on Marcus and more vulnerable to her manipulation. The stress of these attacks began affecting my health and my relationship with Marcus. I became anxious and suspicious, constantly watching for the next assault on my reputation or livelihood. Marcus, instead of supporting me through this difficult time, became increasingly irritated with what he saw as my obsession with his mother. "You're seeing conspiracies everywhere," he would say when I tried to explain what was happening. "Mom wouldn't do those things. You're being paranoid, and frankly, it's exhausting." His lack of support felt like a second betrayal, perhaps even worse than Eleanor's attacks, because it came from the person I loved and trusted most. The final phase of Eleanor's strategy involved introducing a replacement for me. Sophia Carrington was 26 years old, blonde, beautiful, and most importantly came from one of Chicago's oldest banking families. Her great-grandfather had founded Carrington Financial, and her family tree was filled with the kind of blue blood pedigree Eleanor valued above all else. Eleanor arranged for Sophia to be seated next to Marcus at a charity dinner I couldn't attend due to a work commitment. She made sure Sophia was invited to family gatherings and business events where Marcus would be present. Eleanor positioned Sophia as everything I wasn't: established, connected, and born into the world Marcus inhabited. The first time I saw them together was at a restaurant downtown. I had finished a client meeting and was walking to my car when I spotted Marcus and Sophia through the window of an upscale steakhouse. They were sitting close together, laughing over wine and expensive cuts of meat. Sophia's hand was resting on Marcus's arm in a gesture that seemed far too intimate for a casual business acquaintance. When Marcus came home that night, I asked about his day, casually giving him the opportunity to mention the dinner naturally. "Nothing special," he said, loosening his tie. "Just the usual office stuff." The lie hit me harder than if he had simply told me the truth. My husband, the man I had trusted with my heart and my future, was now actively deceiving me about his whereabouts and his companions. The night that changed everything forever arrived 6 months ago during one of Chicago's notorious spring thunderstorms. Marcus was supposedly on a business trip to Denver, though I had begun to suspect these trips involved more personal activities than professional ones. I was alone in our penthouse working late on one of my few remaining design projects when I heard the distinctive sound of a key turning in our front door. Eleanor stepped into our home as if she owned it, which in many ways she did. She was impeccably dressed despite the torrential rain outside, her silver hair perfectly styled and her expression coldly determined. In her hands she carried a leather portfolio that I would soon discover contained the documents that would destroy my marriage. "We need to talk," Eleanor announced, not bothering with pleasantries or explanations for her late-night intrusion. I stood up from my desk, my heart already racing with apprehension. There was something different about Eleanor that night, something final and decisive in her demeanor that terrified me. "Marcus isn't here," I said, hoping to defer whatever confrontation she had planned. "I know exactly where Marcus is," Eleanor replied, her smile sharp as broken glass. "He's in Denver with Sophia, finally getting to know someone who can truly make him happy." The words hit me like a physical blow, confirming my worst suspicions about my husband's recent behavior. But Eleanor wasn't finished delivering devastating news. She opened the leather portfolio and spread its contents across our coffee table with theatrical precision. Photographs spilled out showing Marcus and Sophia in various intimate situations. There was Marcus kissing Sophia goodnight outside her apartment building. Marcus and Sophia holding hands while walking through Millennium Park. Marcus and Sophia sharing breakfast at a bed and breakfast in Wisconsin. These were taken over the past 2 months. Eleanor said, her voice clinically detached, as if she were presenting a business report. Marcus has been much happier lately, more like his old self before he got trapped in this unfortunate marriage. I picked up one of the photographs with shaking hands. The image showed Marcus laughing at something Sophia was saying, his face bright with genuine joy. I hadn't seen him look at me that way in months. "Why are you showing me this?" I whispered, though I already knew the answer. Eleanor pulled out a thick stack of legal documents and placed them in front of me. "These are divorce papers already prepared by the family attorneys. All they need is your signature." I stared at the papers as if they were poisonous snakes. "I won't sign them." "Oh, but you will," Eleanor said, settling into one of our chairs as if she had all the time in the world. "Let me explain your situation clearly, dear. Your business is failing because I've made sure of it. Your reputation in Chicago society is already destroyed beyond repair. You have no real friends here, no family support, and no financial resources independent of my son." She paused to let the weight of my isolation sink in before continuing. "If you sign these papers tonight, I'll ensure you receive a generous settlement. Enough money to relocate somewhere far from Chicago and start fresh. You can rebuild your little design business in some smaller city where people don't know your history. And if I don't sign," Eleanor's smile turned predatory, "then I'll make sure you lose everything. I have enough evidence of your unstable behavior to support claims that you're mentally unfit. I have documentation of your suspicious financial activities. I can make sure you never work as a designer again anywhere in this country." The thunder outside seemed to punctuate her threats, and I realized I was trapped in a nightmare with no easy escape. "Marcus loves me," I said weakly, grasping for something solid in the quicksand of Eleanor's manipulation. "Marcus is infatuated with the idea of rescuing someone beneath his station," Eleanor corrected. "But that novelty has worn off. He's ready to move on to someone appropriate, someone who can truly support his ambitions and maintain his family's reputation." She pulled out her phone and showed me a text message from Marcus. "Can't wait to see you tomorrow night. This has been the best week of my life." The message was time-stamped just 3 hours earlier. "Sign the papers, Nora, and you can leave this situation with some dignity intact. Refuse, and I'll make sure your destruction is public, complete, and permanent." I looked around our penthouse at the life Marcus and I had built together, at the future I had imagined we would share. Everything I had believed about my marriage, about my husband's love, about my place in this world, was crumbling around me. The rain lashed against our floor-to-ceiling windows as I picked up the pen Eleanor offered me. My hands were shaking so violently I could barely hold it steady. "Smart choice," Eleanor murmured as I signed my name to document after document, legally dissolving my marriage and my life as I had known it. When I finished signing, Eleanor efficiently gathered all the papers back into her portfolio. "You have until tomorrow evening to pack your personal belongings and vacate the premises. The building management has already been notified of the change in residence status." She stood to leave, then paused at the door for one final cruelty. "Marcus will be so relieved when I tell him you've finally done the right thing. He was dreading having to ask for a divorce himself." After Eleanor left, I called Marcus one last time. The phone rang several times before he answered, and I could hear laughter and music in the background. "Nora, is everything okay? It's pretty late." "Your mother got what she wanted," I said, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "The papers are signed." There was a long pause before Marcus spoke again. "What papers? What are you talking about?" "The divorce papers." "Marcus, it's over. Divorce papers. Nora. I don't understand what's happening. Are you okay?" But I had already hung up the phone. Whether Marcus was genuinely confused or simply an excellent actor no longer mattered. The marriage was over, and I had nowhere to go but forward. I spent that night packing the few personal belongings I could carry, leaving behind the life I had tried so hard to build and defend. The 5 months following my divorce were the darkest and most transformative period of my life. I found a small apartment in Lincoln Park, a modest space that cost half my remaining savings, just for the security deposit and first month's rent. The apartment was a stark contrast to the penthouse I had shared with Marcus, with its thin walls, temperamental heating, and view of the alley, rather than Lake Michigan. But in that small space, something unexpected happened. I began to rediscover who I was without the constant pressure of Eleanor's scrutiny and the exhausting effort of trying to fit into a world that had never wanted me. For the first time in years, I could make decisions without considering how they would be perceived by Chicago's social elite. The revelation about Sophia Carrington came during my second month of independence. While researching potential new clients online, I stumbled across a Society page article about the Carrington family's business partnerships. Buried in the financial details was a fascinating connection. Carrington Financial had been the Whitmore family's primary investment management firm for over 2 decades, and Eleanor sat on Carrington Financial's charitable foundation board. Sophia wasn't a random socialite who had caught Marcus's eye. She was a carefully selected replacement chosen because her family's business relationship with the Whitmores would strengthen both dynasties' financial positions. Eleanor had orchestrated the entire affair with the precision of a military campaign. This discovery ignited something fierce and determined within me. Eleanor hadn't simply destroyed my marriage out of personal dislike. She had sacrificed my happiness and Marcus's authentic feelings for financial and social advantage. We had been pawns in a larger game of wealth and influence. I decided to fight back, but I would need help from professionals who understood how to navigate the complex world of high society corruption. Through a recommendation from a lawyer who had handled my divorce settlement, I connected with William Cross, a former FBI agent turned private investigator who specialized in financial crimes among the wealthy elite. William was in his 40s, methodical and discreet, with a network of contacts in banking, law enforcement, and government agencies. When I explained my situation, he listened without judgment and agreed to investigate Eleanor's activities for a reasonable fee that I could manage with my limited resources. Women like Eleanor Whitmore often have complicated financial arrangements, William explained during our first meeting. Their public charitable work frequently masks more questionable private activities. If she's been manipulating people and situations as extensively as you describe, there are probably financial irregularities we can uncover. The investigation began with Eleanor's tax records, charity filings, and business partnerships. William had contacts in the IRS and banking industry who could access information that would be impossible for a private citizen to obtain. What they discovered exceeded even my suspicions about Eleanor's criminal activities. For over 8 years, Eleanor had been systematically embezzling money from the various charities she managed. The amounts were substantial, but spread across multiple organizations and disguised as legitimate administrative expenses. She had created shell companies that received consulting fees for services never rendered. She had inflated costs for charity events and pocketed the difference. Most damaging of all, Eleanor had been manipulating Marcus's trust fund for years, transferring money into accounts she controlled and using those funds for personal expenses, including real estate purchases, luxury travel, and investments in companies she had financial interests in. She's stolen close to $2 million over the past decade, William reported during one of our weekly meetings. The paper trail is extensive once you know what to look for. But financial crimes were only part of the evidence we were building. Through William's investigation, I learned that I wasn't Eleanor's first victim. Over the years, she had systematically destroyed relationships and reputations of anyone she perceived as threatening to her family's interests or social position. Margaret Thompson, Eleanor's former personal secretary, agreed to meet with me after William assured her that she would be protected from retaliation. Margaret had worked for Eleanor for 12 years before quitting abruptly the previous year, and her reasons for leaving were directly relevant to my situation. Mrs. Whitmore destroyed Marcus's first serious relationship the same way she destroyed yours, Margaret revealed during our clandestine meeting at a coffee shop far from Eleanor's usual haunts. Sarah Mitchell was a wonderful girl, a pediatric nurse who truly loved Marcus, but she wasn't wealthy enough for Mrs. Whitmore's standards. Margaret described how Eleanor had orchestrated Sarah's downfall using similar tactics: character assassination, professional sabotage, and manipulation of Marcus's perceptions about his girlfriend's motivations and character. Sarah never knew what hit her, Margaret continued. One day she and Marcus were planning their future together, and the next day he was breaking up with her because he believed she had been cheating on him with one of her colleagues at the hospital. Had she been cheating? I asked. Of course not. Mrs. Whitmore had photos taken of Sarah having lunch with a male colleague and having what appeared to be intimate conversations, but the colleague was actually Sarah's gay best friend from nursing school who was going through a difficult breakup. Mrs. Whitmore twisted innocent friendship into evidence of infidelity. The pattern was unmistakable. Eleanor had perfected a system for eliminating women she deemed unsuitable for her son, regardless of Marcus's actual feelings or the women's worthiness. Armed with this information and William's financial evidence, I began planning my counterattack. But I knew that simply exposing Eleanor's crimes wouldn't be enough. I needed to do it in a way that would have maximum impact and ensure that she couldn't manipulate the narrative or escape consequences through her social connections. The opportunity presented itself when Margaret mentioned that Eleanor was planning a major social event to announce Marcus's engagement to Sophia. The party would be held at the Whitmore estate and would include Chicago's most prominent families, city officials, and media representatives. She's been planning this party for months, Margaret explained. It's going to be her crowning achievement the moment when she presents Sophia as the perfect daughter-in-law and cements the Whitmore-Carrington alliance. I realized that this party would be the perfect venue for my revenge. Eleanor would be at her most confident and vulnerable, surrounded by the very people whose opinions she valued most. The public nature of the event would make it impossible for her to control the narrative or minimize the damage. I spent the remaining weeks preparing meticulously for that night. I worked with William to organize all our evidence into a compelling presentation. I contacted Janet Rodriguez, an investigative journalist with the Chicago Tribune, who specialized in exposing corruption among the city's elite. I even hired a stylist and purchased a stunning red dress that would ensure I commanded attention when I made my entrance. Most importantly, I prepared myself emotionally for what I was about to do. This wasn't just about revenge against Eleanor. This was about reclaiming my dignity, protecting future victims, and ensuring that Marcus finally learned the truth about his mother's manipulation of his life and relationships. The night of Eleanor's party was approaching, and I was ready to turn the tables completely. The evening of Eleanor's grand celebration arrived with perfect weather and flawless execution of her social planning. The Whitmore estate had been transformed into a wonderland of luxury and elegance that would have impressed even Chicago's most jaded society observers. Thousands of white roses adorned every surface, crystal chandeliers cast golden light across the manicured gardens, and a string quartet played softly as guests arrived in their finest attire. 200 of Chicago's most influential people had accepted Eleanor's invitation to witness what she believed would be her greatest triumph, the official announcement of Marcus's engagement to Sophia Carrington. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's power structure, including aldermen, judges, business leaders, and prominent socialites who commanded significant influence in Chicago's cultural and political landscape. Eleanor moved through the crowd like a queen holding court, resplendent in a midnight blue gown that had undoubtedly cost more than most people's annual salaries. She was in her element, accepting congratulations and compliments about the beautiful party, while subtly ensuring that everyone understood the significance of the Whitmore-Carrington union for Chicago's social hierarchy. Marcus looked handsome but uncomfortable in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, standing beside Sophia, who glowed with the confidence of a woman who had never doubted her place in this rarefied world. They made an attractive couple by conventional standards, and the assembled guests murmured their approval of Eleanor's choice for her son's future bride. At precisely 8 o'clock as planned, Eleanor called for the guests' attention. The quartet stopped playing, conversations ceased, and all eyes turned toward the makeshift stage that had been erected on the estate's main terrace. This was to be Eleanor's moment of absolute victory, the public validation of her manipulation and control over her son's life. Distinguished friends and family, Eleanor began, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. Thank you for joining us tonight to celebrate a very special announcement. It gives me tremendous pleasure to share that my beloved son Marcus has become engaged to the wonderful Sophia Carrington. The crowd erupted in polite applause as Marcus and Sophia joined Eleanor on the stage. Marcus raised Sophia's hand to show off the enormous diamond engagement ring that sparkled under the party lights. Eleanor beamed with satisfaction as she observed the approving faces of Chicago's social elite. The union of our families represents the best traditions of Chicago society, Eleanor continued, bringing together two families with deep roots in this community and a shared commitment to excellence and service. But just as Eleanor was reaching the crescendo of her speech, a murmur began at the back of the crowd. Guests were turning to look toward the main entrance where a figure in a stunning red dress was walking confidently through the estate's front doors. I had chosen my entrance carefully, arriving at the exact moment when Eleanor would be most vulnerable to disruption. The red dress I wore was a masterpiece of elegant defiance designed to command attention without appearing desperate or inappropriate. My hair was styled in an elegant updo that showcased the diamond earrings Marcus had given me for our first anniversary, earrings I had kept despite returning most of his gifts after our divorce. The effect of my appearance was immediate and dramatic. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as guests recognized me and began whispering urgently to their companions. Eleanor's face went completely white as she spotted me walking purposefully toward the stage, her carefully orchestrated evening suddenly spiraling beyond her control. "What are you doing here?" Eleanor hissed into the microphone, her composure cracking for the first time all evening. "Security," but I was ready for her attempts to have me removed. I pulled out my press credentials from the Chicago Tribune, courtesy of Janet Rodriguez, who was already positioned strategically among the crowd with her photographer. "I'm here as a guest of the press," I announced, clearly, my voice carrying across the now silent crowd. "I have a story to tell that I believe will interest everyone present tonight." Marcus looked completely bewildered, his face cycling through confusion, shock, and something that might have been relief. Sophia clung to his arm, her eyes wide with alarm as she sensed that whatever was about to happen would not be beneficial to her carefully planned future. Eleanor made one last desperate attempt to maintain control of the situation. "This woman is mentally unstable," she declared to the crowd. "She's been harassing our family since her divorce from Marcus was finalized. Please ignore whatever lies she's about to tell." But I was beyond caring about Eleanor's opinion or her ability to manipulate narratives. I had spent months preparing for this moment, and I was not going to be silenced or dismissed. 6 months ago, I began accepting the microphone that Janet Rodriguez handed to me. I was forced to sign divorce papers by a woman who claimed she was protecting her family. Tonight, I want to share the truth about Eleanor Whitmore and the lengths she will go to control the people she supposedly loves. What followed was the most satisfying 20 minutes of my life. With methodical precision, I presented the evidence that William Cross and I had gathered over months of investigation. I shared recordings of Eleanor's threatening phone calls, bank statements showing her embezzlement of charity funds, and documented proof of her systematic destruction of women who dared to love her son. The crowd listened in stunned silence as I revealed Eleanor's manipulation of Marcus's trust fund, her bribes to business associates, to terminate their relationships with me, and her orchestration of both my divorce and Marcus's relationship with Sophia. I showed photographs of the private investigator Eleanor had hired to stalk me, and I read excerpts from emails in which she discussed her plans to eliminate the problem of my marriage to her son. Eleanor Whitmore has spent years presenting herself as a pillar of Chicago society, I continued, but she is actually a criminal who has stolen over $2 million from charitable organizations and destroyed countless lives to maintain her illusion of superiority. The transformation in the crowd was remarkable to witness. These were people who valued reputation above almost everything else, and they were watching one of their own be exposed as a fraud and a criminal in the most public way possible. As I concluded my presentation, several men in dark suits moved through the crowd toward the stage. These were the FBI agents Janet Rodriguez had coordinated with, armed with warrants for Eleanor's arrest on charges of embezzlement fraud and money laundering. Eleanor's arrest at her own party in front of Chicago's most influential citizens was the perfect ending to her reign of manipulation and control. As the agents handcuffed her, she looked at me with pure hatred, finally understanding that she had underestimated the woman she had tried to destroy. "You have no idea what you've done," Eleanor snarled as the agents led her away. "You'll never recover from this." But I was already recovering. Standing on that stage, having exposed Eleanor's crimes to the people whose opinions had once seemed so important, I felt stronger and more confident than I had in years. Marcus approached me as the crowd began to disperse, many guests leaving quickly to avoid being associated with the scandal that would dominate Chicago's gossip circles for months to come. "Nora," he said quietly, his voice full of regret and confusion, "I had no idea about any of it." I looked at the man I had once loved, completely seeing him clearly for perhaps the first time. Marcus wasn't evil like his mother, but he was weak in ways that had made Eleanor's manipulation possible. "I know you didn't know," I replied, "but that doesn't change what happened. It doesn't change the fact that you chose to believe her version of reality instead of trusting me." Sophia had already disappeared from the party, presumably to begin the damage control necessary to protect her family's reputation from association with the Whitmore scandal. As I walked away from the estate that night, I felt a sense of completion and liberation that I hadn't experienced in years. Eleanor's attempt to destroy me had ultimately made me stronger and more independent than I had ever been before. 3 months have passed since that transformative night at the Whitmore estate, and the ripple effects of Eleanor's exposure continue to reshape Chicago's social landscape. Eleanor was sentenced to 8 years in federal prison after pleading guilty to multiple counts of fraud, embezzlement, and money laundering. The judge, clearly disgusted by her abuse of charitable organizations, imposed the maximum sentence allowable under federal guidelines. The scandal dominated Chicago's newspapers and social media for weeks, with investigative journalists uncovering additional victims of Eleanor's manipulation and financial crimes. Several other prominent families quietly distanced themselves from business relationships with the Whitmores, and multiple charitable organizations implemented new oversight procedures to prevent similar abuse of their resources. Marcus attempted to contact me several times following his mother's arrest and conviction. He left voicemails filled with apologies and expressions of regret, asking for opportunities to explain his perspective and perhaps rebuild our relationship. But I had moved beyond the need for his explanations or validation. When he finally appeared at my apartment one evening looking haggard and genuinely remorseful, I agreed to have one final conversation with him. We sat in my small living room, a space that represented my independence and self-sufficiency in ways our luxurious penthouse never had. "I failed you completely," Marcus said, his voice heavy with guilt and sadness. "I should have seen what she was doing. I should have protected you instead of enabling her." "Yes, you should have." I agreed, not interested in softening the truth to make him feel better. "But more importantly, you should have trusted me. When I tried to tell you what was happening, you chose to believe I was paranoid, rather than consider that your mother might be manipulating both of us." "I was raised to respect her judgment," Marcus offered weakly. "She had never steered me wrong before." "She had never encountered someone she couldn't control before," I corrected. "Your mother destroyed at least 2 relationships that could have made you genuinely happy, because the women involved didn't meet her standards for social status and financial advantage." Marcus looked at me with eyes full of regret and something that might have been hope. "Can we try again? Now that I know the truth? Now that she can't interfere anymore?" I had anticipated this question and had spent considerable time thinking about my answer. Looking at Marcus, I felt compassion for the man who had been as much a victim of his mother's manipulation as I had been, but I also felt a clarity about our future that surprised me with its definitiveness. "We can't go back, Marcus," I said gently but firmly. "Too much has changed. I've changed. I've discovered strengths I never knew I had, and I've built a life based on my own choices rather than someone else's expectations." "But I love you," Marcus said desperately. "I never stopped loving you." "I believe that," I replied. But love isn't enough to rebuild trust that has been so fundamentally broken. You didn't just fail to protect me from your mother's attacks. You participated in them by dismissing my concerns and choosing her version of reality over mine. The conversation was difficult but necessary for both of us. Marcus needed to understand the full consequences of his choices, and I needed to articulate clearly why forgiveness didn't necessarily mean reconciliation. My business has experienced an unexpected renaissance following the publicity surrounding Eleanor's exposure. Dozens of potential clients have reached out to me, many of them women who were inspired by my courage to stand up against powerful people who had tried to silence me. My story has resonated with people who have felt dismissed or underestimated by those in positions of authority. More importantly, I've discovered a sense of purpose that extends beyond commercial success. Several women have contacted me to share their own experiences of manipulation and abuse by influential family members or community leaders. I've begun using my platform to advocate for others who are facing similar situations, connecting them with resources and legal support. 6 weeks ago, I met David Stone at a community art exhibition featuring work by local designers and artists. David is a pediatrician who volunteers at free clinics serving underprivileged communities. He comes from a middle-class background similar to my own, and his values are grounded in service rather than social status. Our relationship is developing slowly and naturally, built on mutual respect and shared interests, rather than the intense passion and societal pressure that characterized my relationship with Marcus. David knows my history with the Whitmores, but doesn't treat me as either a victim to be pitied or a celebrity to be impressed by. "I admire what you did," David told me during one of our early dates, "but I'm more interested in who you are now than in the drama you escaped from." This perspective has been refreshing and healing in ways I hadn't expected. David sees me as I am today, rather than as the woman who was once married to Marcus Whitmore, or the person who exposed Eleanor's crimes. The process of rebuilding my life has taught me invaluable lessons about resilient self-advocacy and the importance of trusting my own perceptions even when others attempt to gaslight or dismiss my concerns. Eleanor's attempt to destroy me ultimately forced me to discover inner resources and strengths I never knew I possessed. I've learned that revenge, when properly executed, isn't about destroying others, but about reclaiming your own power and dignity. My goal was never simply to hurt Eleanor or Marcus, but to expose the truth and prevent them from harming other people in the future. The most profound realization I've had during this journey is that Eleanor's opinion of me never mattered as much as I thought it did. Her attempts to convince me that I didn't belong in their world were successful only because I had accepted her premise that their world was worth belonging to in the first place. I now understand that a community or social group that would reject someone based on their background or economic status isn't a community worth joining. The people who truly matter are those who value character integrity and kindness over social pedigree and financial status. Sometimes people ask me if I regret the dramatic way I chose to expose Eleanor's crimes. They suggest that I could have handled the situation more quietly or privately, avoiding the public spectacle and media attention. But I have no regrets about the path I chose. Eleanor's power came from operating in shadows and maintaining her public reputation while destroying people privately. The only way to truly stop her was to expose her behavior in the most public forum possible, surrounded by the very people whose opinions she valued most. My story has become larger than my personal experience with the Whitmore family. It represents the possibility of standing up to powerful people who abuse their positions and the importance of believing in your own worth, even when others try to convince you otherwise. Eleanor thought she was teaching me my place in the social hierarchy. Instead, she taught me something far more valuable. My own worth isn't determined by other people's approval or acceptance. True belonging comes from being authentic to yourself and surrounding yourself with people who appreciate and support that authenticity. The luxury party where I confronted Eleanor was the end of one chapter of my life and the beginning of another. In that moment, I stopped being a victim of her manipulation and became the author of my own story. That transformation, more than any revenge I achieved, is the true victory of that night. What experiences have taught you to trust your own judgment over others' opinions? Have you ever had to stand up to someone who seemed more powerful than you? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like this video if my story resonated with you. Subscribe for more stories about overcoming challenges and finding your inner strength, and please share this video with anyone who might need to hear this message of empowerment. Thank you for listening to my story, and remember that you have more power than you think to change your circumstances and protect your dignity. Your voice matters, and your truth deserves to be heard.